Let's learn how to create this impossible pyramid in Blender using some clever view layers and a single composite render.
TipTut.
Hello everybody, welcome back to TipTut. Today we're taking a look at creating this impossible pyramid. As you can see here, whilst it spins, it actually has 3 worlds inside the same pyramid, and we do this using some clever view layer and compositing tricks for a single render in Blender. So there is no video editing tricks done to make this work. It is all done with one render coming out of Blender. I'll show you how this works in both Eevee and Cycles using a simplified version of the setup, and then I'll take you through some of the ways that I created the grass and the trees and things as well. There will be a download to download the finished file from my website, tiptut.xyz. You can find the link in the description if you wanted to take a look at the finished product. Without any further ado though, let's just jump right in, and we'll start off with building the pyramid components, and then I'll show you how to make it work in both Eevee and Cycles separately. Right, so let's start by making our pyramid. So first up, we will select our default cube, press X, and then choose delete to get rid of it, would you believe it? And we will shift a new cone. Let's twirl up this option down here and reduce the amount of vertices to 3 and increase the radius to 1.5, and that gives us a pyramid shape that we're looking for. We need to move our origin point down to the bottom face, so we're going to select this object, tab into edit mode, press 3 for face selection and select the bottom face here. Let's then press Shift S and cursor to selected, which will move our 3D cursor to the center of this face. Then let's go into object mode again with tab, right click, set origin to 3D cursor. Shift S again, cursor to world origin. Shift S again, selection to cursor. That's going to move our pyramid up onto the floor and put the origin point in the middle. Now we need a number of copies of this pyramid. So we're going to press Shift D and right click to release, Shift D and right click to release once again. We'll name this first one cone front, the second one cone right, and the final one cone left. So now we have 3 copies of the cone on top of each other. Let's select cone front, tab into edit mode, 3 for face selection, and we're going to select the front face, then press P to move that to a new selection, and we'll call this mask front. We're going to do the same thing for the other cones. What we're essentially doing here is creating 3 copies of the same pyramid that are going to have an open face on different edges. So we will select cone right, tab into edit mode, select the right face, P, selection, mask right. And we'll do the same thing for the final one. We will tab back into object mode, select cone left, go to the left face, select it, press P, new selection, mask left. So now if I hide all of my masks, you'll see that we have 3 shapes, each of which has an open face. So we have an open face on the left, an open face on the right, and an open face on the front. That's perfect. We'll leave all of those stacked on top of each other so that we now have our pyramid. So if we hide everything except cone front for the moment, you'll see that where we want to actually render is the inside of our pyramid. So if I turn on face orientation, you'll see that at the moment the outside has our normals. We want to tab into our cones and flip the normals. So mesh normals, flip, that's in edit mode. And we want to do that for each of our cones. So cone left, we'll select that, tab into edit mode, mesh normals, flip, and we'll do it for cone right as well. Tab into edit mode, select everything, mesh normals, flip. And now we have the inside of our pyramid as the side that we will be applying our materials and things to. We do not need to do that obviously for our masks. So I'm just going to press numpad 7 to go to top view, and I'm going to turn off my face orientation and go into rendered view up here. And I'm just going to duplicate a few of these lights. I'm going to move this light around like so. Let's go to our light properties and make the radius of it like 1 meter. And I'm just going to duplicate that so that I have a light on each face. We will also need an object to go inside each face. In the real example, I had grass and trees growing and things like that. For this example, I'm just going to keep it simple and add 3 objects. Let's just hide everything for now. Let's turn off everything here apart from our lights. Let's press Shift A and we will add in a cube. Let's scale that down. Let's Shift A and we can add in an icosphere. Let's scale that down. And we'll add in a torus as well, and we'll scale that down. And for the torus, we'll also rotate it a little bit too. Now for the cube, we will call this contents front. The icosphere will be contents right, and the torus will be contents left. And we will select all three of those things and we'll just move them up in space a little bit. If we turn on cone front, you'll see that we can have them floating inside our cones. Now, what we want to do is have, the cone, when you're looking at it from the front, will show the cube. When it rotates, it's going to show the icosphere. When it rotates further, it's going to show the torus. But at the moment, everything is sitting on top of everything else. The way we resolve that is using view layers. And view layers work by hiding or showing collections of content when you do a render. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry, it will by the time we popped everything into a collection. So let's get started moving it into the collections, and then we'll go through what the view layers mean. So we will need a collection for each mask and a collection for each content that we'll be using to mask. So what that means is, let's turn on everything here. I'm going to select my masks first. So mask front, we'll select that and press M, and then move that to a new collection, which we will call mask front. We'll do the same thing for mask left. That's M, new collection, mask left. And the same thing for mask right, M, new collection, mask right. The others will need to take the cone on the front and the contents on the front. So we'll just control clicking both of those and move them to their own collection, which we'll call cone front. The cone left and the contents left need to go in their own collection too, which we'll call cone left. And the cone right and contents right need to go in their own collection, which we'll call cone right. You can start to see a pattern. Everything else, that leaves our camera and our three lights inside a collection that I've just called scene setup. Inside that collection as well, I'm also going to Shift A and new empty axis so that we can just control the camera later on. Okay, so let's twirl down all of our collections. And with everything in the right collection now, we need to start creating a thing called a view layer. Now, if you go up to the top right of your screen, you'll see the option view layer here. We're going to rename this one all. Okay, and this is going to have all of our collections visible in this view layer. You'll notice next to the eyeball icon, you have this tick icon. And if you turn these on and off, you'll start to see what's going to happen here. You can say, for this view layer, I would like only this content to be considered part of the view layer and therefore rendered. So in view layer all, we would like everything, but this is only going to be for our reference. We don't want this one to render. So we're going to go down to our view layer properties and we're going to turn off use for rendering. Now let's click this button here next to it, the add view layer button. We'll click new and we will call this one mask front. You've guessed it, inside mask front, we only want the mask front collection, but also the scene setup collection. That's very important because that's going to have your camera and your lights in it. So we want to uncheck everything else so that we just have mask front and our lights and our camera inside this collection. Let's create a new collection. This one has use for rendering checked. All the following ones have use for rendering checked. Mask right, and we'll turn off everything except for mask right. A new collection, mask left, and we'll turn off everything except for mask left. Another new collection, this can be cone front, and we'll turn off everything except for cone front. And a new view layer, cone right, turn off everything except for cone right. And on all of these, I'm leaving the scene setup collection enabled. Final one, cone left, and we'll turn off everything except for cone left. So you can see now that I have a collection cone left that has the torus inside of it, and you can move between your collections here, your view layers here, and I have cone right, which has our icosphere in it, and I have cone front, which has our cube in it. Then I have my three masks that only have the masks for their respective cones in them as well. Let's go back to all for now so that we've got everything on our screen. So I'll press numpad 0 to look inside my camera, or you can just click this camera button here. And then I'm going to press numpad 7 to go to the top view and press Control Alt numpad 0 to move my camera to my current view. If you don't have a numpad, you can press N to bring up your view settings. Go to view here and choose camera to view and lock that on. And what that means is when you're looking through the camera, moving the camera will lock on to your actual camera's view. So I'm going to do that again, 7, Control Alt 0, and I can position my camera. If I select item and make sure I have my camera selected in my collection here, I can actually make sure that I'm perfectly zeroed out. So now my camera is looking directly down at the top of my pyramid. So at this point, I'm going to go to my render properties. I'm going to make sure that I have transparency turned on in my film options, and I'm going to make sure that I've set up my output. For this, you'll definitely want some kind of render that has transparency. So a file format of PNG would be perfect. So we're going to leave it on that. And I'm just going to press F12 to do a quick test render. Now, as you can see, it kind of flickered through a number of different phases there. And if we twirl down this option here, we can see that we actually have render layers for each of our masks. We have cone front, we have cone right, and we have cone left and things like that, okay? So you can see where this is gonna go, but at the moment, all we have is our individual view layers as a render. What we need to do is composite those together so that they merge correctly into one cohesive PNG that we can then compile into an animation. So let's quickly create our composite view, and then we'll move on to Eevee versus cycles to get this thing to work. Go to your compositing tab here and check use nodes, and that's going to bring up your render layer and a composite node here. Let's go and Shift A view node. So we'll be able to see the results of our render in this box here. If you go to view, you can scale it down a bit. Let's do 0.5, and you can offset it and stick it up in the top right so that your nodes aren't in the way of your footage. Here comes the important bit. Let's take away render layers from composite. And as you can see here, we can twirl down and choose our view layers. So we need to choose one for mask front, and I'm actually going to rename these so that it's much easier to keep track. So we have mask front here, we have an image, and we have an alpha output. I'm going to twirl that down, I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to change this one to mask right, and I'll rename that too. And I'm basically going to create a view layer node for each of my view layers except all. So you can see here that we have now a number of view layer nodes. We have one for each of our masks and one for each of our cones. And we now basically need to smush all these together into one composite. Okay, so I'm just going to twirl all of these down, remembering that the top is image and the bottom is alpha output. And I'm just going to line them up so that it's much easier to work with. Let's have mask front, and underneath that, let's have cone front. Then we'll have mask right, and underneath that, we'll have cone right. Then we'll have mask left, and underneath that, we'll have cone left. Now, the reason we created these masks is because we basically want to say, for our view layer cone front, we only want that to be visible when there is content on our mask front. So it's like any kind of clipping mask from any design software, really. To do that is really simple. Let's Shift A new alpha over node. And I'm just going to connect this alpha over node up to our viewer so we can see what we're working with. Then I'm going to take my cone front, and this is the image of our cone front, and I'll pop that into the bottom slot of our alpha over node. And you can see now that we have our cone front image coming out of our viewer. Let's take mask front and pop that into the second image. And then we'll take the alpha channel of mask front, that's this gray output node here, and we'll pop that into the factor. And then that is going to get rid of rest of our content that isn't over the mask front content. The reason we do alpha rather than image into the factor is because then it's a binary thing. There's either content or there's not. You know, if you have semi-transparent materials, and that will also be a semi-transparent mask, but that's not what we want. We want a fully opaque mask. Let's disconnect that, and we want to do this setup for the rest of these as well. So now if we plug the image output of each of these into our viewer, we can see that we have our mask for each shape. Now at the moment we only have one of these. We want to merge all three of them together, and we do that by just mixing down using alpha over nodes. So we will add in 2 more alpha overs. That's one here, and we'll just duplicate that. Then we want to mix the alpha over from our right and left cones together and put the output of that into the second slot of the one above it. And then we'll put the output of the front cone into the first slot of that alpha over, which mixes us down to a single output, which when we use the viewer, will give us all 3 sides of our triangle. Now, this looks great from a top view. Okay, let me show you what happens if we go back to our layout view and we move our camera. So let's do something like this angle, and you'd think that would be okay, right? We have a mask and a mask and a mask. Let's go back to our compositing view and hit F12. Boom. And as you can see in our viewer now, it's kind of worked, but not really. And that's because our materials are 2-sided for our masks. So when we're looking at the front of our mask, we're getting content that is being used to mask our cone. And when we're looking at the back of our mask, we're getting content that is used to mask our cone. But we don't want content when we're looking at the back of the mask, because as our pyramid rotates, we don't want to see anything other than what we're looking at directly. This is where the Eevee versus cycles technique comes in. So at this point, we shall diverge. Before we do that, however, I like to add a little anti-aliasing node in between our last alpha over and our composite. And I'll make sure that I'm actually connecting my image not only to my viewer, but to my composite as well, so that when we render, we actually get a final view layer that is a composite render of everything. As you can see, we're getting this issue where this triangle shape here is the backside of mask left being composited onto the footage. We don't want to see the backside of mask left. We only want them to be single-sided. Now, to really highlight this, let's quickly add a little bit of animation. I'm going to center up my camera to the front of my cone. I'm going to tie my camera to my empty that I created earlier by selecting the camera, then selecting the empty object with Control, and then pressing Control P to parent the object. Now I can rotate my empty on the Z-axis and my camera will follow it. So let's say on frame 1, let's press I to insert a keyframe for rotation for the empty. And let's do frame 120. Let's add in another keyframe rotation and then RZ360 and confirm that rotation keyframe so that we now have a pyramid that spins around in a circle. Let's then trim down our timeline to 120 as well so that we've now got this perfectly looping pyramid, and I'll set the interpolation mode to linear. So we've just got now this pyramid that just rotates in a little circle, okay? Great, so let's come out of our camera here, and I'm going to go to my mask front view layer. To make this one-sided, it's really simple in Eevee. We want to go down to materials, and we'll add a new material. For the sake of simplicity, under my shading view here, I'm going to delete my principled BSDF, and I'm just going to add in an emission node that is pure black. So we've just got black. We know that that's all we're working with. Under the material properties for that, we then just need to select backface culling. And then when we rotate to the back face of our mask, we get no content. What this means is when the camera rotates around to the mask and we don't need it anymore for the render, boop, it's no longer going to create content and it's no longer going to mess up our composite. We just need to do that for the rest of the masks. So mask left as well. Let's select that and we will apply the material to it. Let's go mask right and we'll apply the material to that too. Now, when we look through our camera and go to say frame, 20, if we press F12 to do a quick render, bam, we get a perfect cut through of our pyramid. Let's go to another frame to test it even further. Let's go to like here, F12, bam, perfect cut through of our pyramid showing our different shapes. So that is the technique. It's really that simple for Eevee. Obviously, our pyramid's pretty boring at the moment, but we can add all sorts of stuff on the inside, which I'll show you in the end. For cycles, it is exactly the same process. Let's just change quickly our render engine over to cycles. But as you can see, it's going to balls up a little bit differently because you don't have backface culling in cycles. Let's go to the shading panel here and select one of our masks. And where we have material 1, which we will call Eevee, we will duplicate this and call it cycles. So to do that, you need to mix a transparency node using backfacing as the mask. So we'll Shift A new transparency node, and Shift A new mix shader. And we will drop the mix shader between the emission and the material output, and we will mix our transparency BSDF in there as well. So let's go to mask front view layer so we can just see this. If we move our factor, you can see now that we're getting transparency, but we don't control what side it's on. It's on both sides of our material. To fix that, we just need to add in a geometry node and use the back-facing output as the factor of our mix shader so that we get fully opaque on the front view faces and fully transparent on the back view faces. So then when we go to layout mode, and we will quickly go to our other masks and swap out the material to cycles. In a much slower render, obviously, you can now see that we have our impossible pyramid working in cycles as well. So obviously this is a very simple setup pyramid. It's not like the one that I showed you in the beginning. So let's take a look at that. So you can download this file from my website, tiptut.xyz, if you'd like to see how I created this impossible pyramid with the grass and the trees and such. It's basically just a pretty simple hair system on a ground plane that I've popped inside our pyramid, and just, a leaf particle system on a twig and things like that. It's not particularly complicated. And I have a wind force object here to push some physics through my grass, like so. On prism right, the plant has grown up a little bit, and I've just added a few more leaves and a bigger twig. And obviously I've had to put the wind physics inside each prism view layer because the wind is blowing in a different direction. And then in the final one, prism left, you can see that I have a massive tree. It's completely overgrown. And you can see that even though everything's sticking out of the edges here, it really doesn't matter because of the mask making our content. Like I said, if you want to dive around into this, you can download it from my website. And that's it for this tutorial. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I know this one was a bit more involved than what we usually do in Blender here on TipTut, but I think it's really fun. It's a cool technique and you can do all sorts of cool stuff with it. And I'm having a lot of fun in Blender, so hopefully we can continue exploring together. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time on TipTut. Wow, we finally passed 90 members this month on TipTut. That is an incredible amount of support, and I'm so thankful to each and every single one of you. If you'd like to become a member too for exclusive perks and benefits, click that join button below.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.